incredibly unfair. Bad things happen. There are bad people in the world who do bad things, oftentimes to good people. It's unfortunate, but it's also a harsh reality of our world. In order to prevent people from doing bad things, we send them off to prison. However, our prison system, especially within the US, is immensely flawed. Uh, Ever since the 1980s, more specifically the war on drugs, our prison system has been flooded with new inmates. However, that's only a smaller part of a much bigger issue, and that is known as overcrowding, more specifically mass incarceration. According to Vice, the number of inmates within the US has more than quadrupled since the 1980s. For the next few minutes, I will be discussing why mass incarceration is such a huge issue within the US and why we must act upon it as quickly as possible. However, the main reasons can be summed up as there are glaring statistics attached to mass incarceration that we should all be concerned about. Uh, our prison systems focus too much on punishment. And finally, our prison system is incredibly inhumane. Firstly, let's look at the data, since that's the most concrete evidence against mass incarceration. According to Vice, there are about 2.5 million inmates within U.S. prisons. That might not sound like much, but let me put it into perspective. The U.S. only accounts for 5% of the world's population, yet it holds about 25% of the world's prisoners. This alone is ridiculous, but when you take into consideration that only 7.7% of the inmates are violent offenders, and most of the rest are drug offenders, it just makes it outrageous. Now, I'm not trying to defend drug use by any means, as they have caused multiple people, millions of people damage and pain and worldwide. However, it is important to note that most of our efforts and our money are going towards keeping drug offenders, such as people who were caught for possession of marijuana in prisons, and not violent criminals, such as rapists or even murderers. Also, going back to the money, according to ACLU, it costs about $80 billion to sustain our prison systems, and all that money comes from us. It's taxpayer money. And this alone is enough to show how ineffective if, mass incarceration actually is, as $80 billion are going towards keeping 2.5 million people in prison. Moving on from statistics and onto punishments. Now, it might sound odd to say that prison focuses too much on punishment, as isn't that what prison really is? Just a punishment for committing crimes? Well, that's only part of prison's purpose. In reality, prison's meant to serve three main purposes. It's meant to punish criminals, it's meant to incarcerate criminals, that way they can no longer commit crimes, and finally, it's meant to rehabilitate inmates. As the old saying goes, today's inmate is tomorrow's neighbor. However, our prison system objectively fails at this last part. According to CBS News, about 43% of ex-convicts end up back in jail within the first 3 years of being released. And why is that? Well, most prisoners suffer from psychiatric disorders, hence why they commit their crimes in the first place. However, within prison, there's little to no psychiatric help offered to prisoners, as most therapy sessions are often very brief and ineffective and only really happen if the budget allows it. And also, there are little to no reform programs offered in most prisons. This is important because once prisoners are released back into society, they have a very hard time acquiring jobs or even government aid. It's honestly very sad and tragic, as it seems like once you have a criminal record, Society just gives up on you and just expects you to just fade away into obscurity. Finally, and arguably the most disgusting thing about our prison system is how inhumane it is. I previously mentioned that our prison system focuses too much on punishment, as most punishments are incredibly inhumane and can be even torturous. A great example of this is solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is when a prisoner is left in a poorly lit cell with minimal human interaction for an extended period of time. This can be a form of cruel and unusual punishment and can even be considered torture under extreme circumstances. However, within the prison system, it is unregulated, so it is allowed. According to Jonathan Simon, a professor of law at UC Berkeley, uh, prisons are such disgusting places to be at that they're breeding grounds for chronic illnesses. These include, but are not limited to, physical ones such as diabetes and mental ones such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and even depression. When you combine these chronic illnesses with psychiatric disorders that, again, most prisoners suffer from, and finally, torturous punishments, it can result in inhumane conditions that no human being should ever have to endure, no matter the crime. In conclusion, mass incarceration is incredibly ineffective and has even backfired on us. The reasons for mass incarceration's ineffectiveness is due to the glaring numbers are attached to it, such as the sheer cost it takes to sustain the amount of prisoners that we have, uh, how our prison system's priorities are not what they should be, as they should be more focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Finally, how incredibly inhumane our prison systems actually are. Now, mass incarceration was bred out of good intentions. It was meant to keep crime and drugs off of our streets. However, it has largely backfired at us, and we are paying the cost for it. And we need to stop this as soon as possible in order to save time and money. Thank you.